Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we'll be answering the question, what are 7 things I should be doing as I get near retirement? When it comes to retirement and we're talking about being near retirement, we're talking usually about like 5 years from retirement, sometimes 10, definitely not more than that, where you want to say, okay, there are a few things that I know I need to do as I get closer to retirement, and I don't want to do it all in my last year because that may mess up my retirement. Where if you give yourself enough time, you feel like you'll be able to check everything off the box. So when it comes to near retirement, the first thing that we want to make sure that we do is you always want to start with your goals. And we talk about how that motivates and pushes you through the most difficult times. When you know why you're doing something, it makes it that much easier to keep doing it. And the example that I've given you guys for my kids is when I remember when Pokemon first came out when I was in middle school and I wanted to buy Pokemon Red. So back then, the two versions were called Pokemon Red and Blue, and I decided I was going to get Pokemon Red. Well, I had to take my $5 allowance and I had to save that each week until I was able to buy the Pokemon game. And I put the game on layaway. And so my parents would take me to Walmart every week or every two, and I would put my allowance towards the game. And then after a month or two, something like that, I was able to buy the game. I think the game was like $40. Well, that was something that I was motivated by. If I was just told to save $5 every week, it wouldn't have felt the same because I would have thought of all these great things I could have, spent my money on at like the Dollar Tree or something like that, where I would have been able to buy these little trinkets. But because I had such a clear vision of what my goal was, I was motivated by the Pokemon game that I was very willing to forego all of those short term and silly little things I could have wasted my money on to buy the game. And that was one of the best experiences that I've had. Where, as far as my parents teaching me that you have to save for the things that you want and not be distracted by these little things that you think that you want. So usually, as I mentioned to you guys, we're talking about maybe 2 to 3 life goals. How are we looking on those? We set them up in our financial plan. Now we're getting closer to retirement. How are we looking on those 2 to 3 life goals? Have we been able to align our short-term goals to help us achieve our medium-term goals, to help us achieve our long-term goals? And so you want to just look at that. How am I doing on those life goals? Second, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of your expenses. And we're not just talking about your day-to-day expenses, we're talking about some replacement expenses. I have a client who has a Tesla, and he told me that a new Tesla engine usually costs somewhere around like $10,000, and the engine is good for about 20 years. Well, that means that we're going to have to replace that engine at least once in retirement. So we need to make sure that we are budgeting for that expense if he plans on maintaining that car. You may also want to budget for things like your roof. You have to get a new roof. Well, if you plan on living in the house that you're living in, well, you're going to want to make sure that you have that included in your budget. Then, of course, your regular things like, am I going to travel? Am I going to eat out? How often am I going to travel? How many grandkids do I have? Do I want to get them Christmas presents? Like, what are these different budgets? Because we have to make sure that they are included. You don't just want to take care of your normal expenses like food and shelter and transportation, but you also want to say, how will my health care change as a result of me not working? Because my job is currently subsidizing some of my healthcare expenses. If I have to pay all of it, then what does that look like? If my plan was to use Medicare to help me with my healthcare expenses, what are their qualifications? What does my income need to look like? What does my assets need to look like? You just want to list out all of the expenses that you believe you'll have in retirement, and then you want to set that aside to where you're able to account for that in your budget. Whether you're talking about spending a portion of it in your day-to-day expenses, or you're talking about the portion you need to save every single month to make sure that you are set up for success when it comes to your retirement. Third on the list is you may want to look at consolidating some of your retirement accounts. The Bureau of Labor says that we have on average about 11 jobs over our lifetime. So you may be looking at 11 different retirement accounts at 11 different places. If you were consolidating them as you went to each employer, well, then this is maybe something that you don't have to worry about. But if you have multiple accounts, as you need to make your income withdrawal plan, how you're going to be able to afford your lifestyle, you may want to have all of the money at least in 2 or 3 accounts, if not finding a way to put them all into one account. It just makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to withdraw your money out. Now, there is tax implications for you moving the accounts from like a pre-tax to an after-tax where you have to pay some taxes. You may be retiring in your 30s, so you may have to leave some of your money in your early withdrawal accounts where they have penalties associated with them if you take the money out before 59 and a half. There are lots of things that you want to look at, but you want to see if it's possible for you to combine some of your retirement accounts without you incurring any sort of a tax or a penalty. Fourth, you want to look at your Social Security, see what that looks like. How much are they going to be giving you as far as is estimated? You can go to the Social Security website and they will give you an estimate of how much they believe you'll be able to get on an annual basis, and then you can figure out how much you would have on a monthly basis. Now, if you have heard where it makes sense for you to be able to postpone withdrawing from your Social Security because you're able to get more out, well, that is true. Where you decide if it makes sense for you to withdraw Social Security at 70, or if you want to withdraw it at 64, or if you want to draw it even a little bit earlier. If you want to decide whether it makes sense for you to withdraw from Social Security early, or if you want to wait till like you're 70, for instance, all you need to do is take the difference in the amount of money that you have. So let's say the Social Security office, if you withdrew the money at 64, they were going to give you $600 a month. And then let's say if you waited until 70, they were going to give you $1,000 a month. Well, that extra $400 times the number of months in a year, which is 12. So 400 times 12 is 4,800. So you'll be looking at getting about an extra $5,000 a month. And then what you would do is you would say, if I took my Social Security out at that $600 a month from 64 to 70, well, 600 times 12 is 7,200. So you would say, okay, my $7,200 times that 7 years, well, that's going to be about $50,000 that I would have gotten. So that means I would need to live 10 additional years to be able to make that extra $5,000 a year times the 10 years. Well, that would be the $50,000. So if you plan on living past 80, then it would make sense for you to go ahead and say, I'm going to hold off on getting my Social Security until 70. If you don't plan on being around that long, well, then it doesn't make sense for you. So you should take advantage of your Social Security right away. Now, naturally, we have financial constraints that may make it impossible for us to be able to wait until 70. But when you're 5 years out, now you could say, okay, well, it makes sense for me to be able to withdraw my Social Security at 70. So I need to have assets in place to ensure that I can afford my lifestyle from 64 to 70 so that I can then get the max amount of Social Security. That leads us very nicely into the fifth thing that you want to do as you near retirement, and that is making sure that you have your income plan set up. And what I mean is, right now you have a bag full of money somewhere, and that money is going to have to be able to maintain your lifestyle for the rest of your life. You do not plan on working again. That's what we call retirement. Retirement on the one end is pure financial freedom. You have control of your life and you don't have to trade your time for money, but you trade the money for time. On the other end, you are now unemployed and you have no way to increase your assets by trading your time for money. I mean, technically you could unretire and go back to work, but that's not what we're trying to do. So you don't have a way to turn your time back into money. So as a result, you have to figure out exactly how I'm going to turn my money into my time. And so you're going to have to put that income plan in place. Now, there's different rules that you'll see where some people will say, oh yeah, the 4% rule is great, which is a very fancy way of saying you just live off of the 4% returns that your portfolio makes. So if you have a conservative investment, so you drop down from 10, 15, 20% returns to like 4 or 5% returns because you're trying to be conservative, well, that means your account is growing by that 5% every year. So if you live off of that interest, then you shouldn't run out of money because you're always generating that same 5% every year as you're spending that same 5%. And then so some people say, that 4% rule, that's good. Some will say the number needs to be lower, where it's like a 3% rule. However you want to create your income plan as far as turning those assets into income, that's what you want to do. If you have real estate, are you going to sell some of the real estate, or are you just going to live off of the rental income from your real estate? Do you maybe have a government position where you're in drop, where they give you a lump sum of money after a certain period of time, and then it's up to you to put that money in an annuity to turn it into an income, to put it in the stock market to turn it into an income? Or you just kind of keep the money because you're very nervous and you don't know what to do with it, where you just keep it in a CD or something? Well, in a CD, you're not going to keep up with inflation, so I wouldn't recommend that, because that would be the same as having like a 3% loss on your portfolio every single year if you account for inflation. Inflation is lowering the value of that money, so you have to, or at least it's highly recommended that you at least keep your money somewhere that keeps up with inflation. But you want to have this income plan in place. At 5 years out, you are going to take the time to be able to say, this is where my money is going to go, and this is how it's going to generate my income, and I'm going to be able to maintain my certain lifestyle based off of those returns from my investments. I have clients who took their retirement money and then started a business and a passion project, or they started a 501c3. And whatever it is that you end up wanting to do, you just need to have the income plan in place. You need to have a plan of what you're going to do with your bag of money to turn that into a check that you can then live off of for the rest of your life. The sixth thing you want to do as you near retirement is rebalancing and reallocating your assets. You do not want to have yourself exposed to a lot of risk in whatever market or business or real estate, selling art, whatever the adventure is that you are currently allocating your money towards. You want to make sure that you're getting more conservative as you near retirement. Not so much so that you're no longer even making enough of an income to keep up with inflation, but you do want to make sure that you are protecting yourself against the possible market loss. One asset allocation is whatever your age is, that's how much money that you need to have protected and out of the aggressive market. So for example, if you're 20 years old, then you should have 20% of your money safe. So the safe would be in like bonds or in cash, CDs, things that are generally going to have a much smaller return, but you also don't have to worry about the money disappearing. When you're 40 years old, then you would have 40% of your income in the bonds and cash. You'd have the other 60% invested in the equities and aggressively in the market. When you're 60 years old, then as you guessed, you would have 60% of your money in bonds and cash, and you'd have 40% still in the market aggressively allocated. When you're 80 years old, you would have 80% of your money conservatively protected, and you would have 20% of your money aggressively still in the stocks in the market. There are lots of different ways for you to do your asset allocation, but you do want to make sure that you are keeping track of that. Whether you adjust it every 5 years or if you adjust it every 10 years, you do want to make sure you're adjusting it. Now, there are some people who are a little more active where they adjust it every year. Basically, whenever they get an email about updating their employee benefits, they go ahead and adjust their asset allocation to match their years. There's lots of ways to do the asset allocation, but this is just one of the examples. You do want to make sure you're adjusting it. You should not have the same asset allocation at 50 that you had at 20. You shouldn't have the same allocation at 30 that you have at 80. And so you just want to make sure whatever that plan is, that you are adjusting it as you get older, so that way you're locking in some of your gains and protecting yourself from a possible recession, as generally that does happen on a cycle about every 10 years. You don't want to get caught in your retirement or nearing your retirement where we're dipping into a recession and you're losing 20 to 50% of your portfolio. If you could limit it, it would be much better for you. The seventh and final thing that you want to do as you near retirement is you want to check your wills. Just make sure that you have everybody that you want in there as a beneficiary. If anything has changed in your relationships with your spouse or your kids, if people have passed, if people have moved on, you don't want them listed as the beneficiary if, for example, you've remarried. You don't want them listed as the beneficiary if, for example, they're not 18 yet, because they're not old enough to be able to enter into a contract. And so generally your government is not going to give them the benefits. So you want to make sure that you have these things lined up. You also want to just look at your life insurance. Are you planning on keeping any, or are you getting rid of all of it? Do you need to have a living will? Do you need to make any adjustments in a power of attorney? What are the things that you want to make sure that you have set up so that if something health-wise happens to you, that your assets will be protected? If something just unexpectedly happens to you and you pass, you want to make sure that your legacy is protected. It would be a shame for you to have so successfully built such an amazing legacy, and then for some reason the legacy isn't executed exactly the way that you had envisioned it, or you really would have counted like a grandchild if you had been reminded to update it. Whatever the situation is, you just simply want to make sure that you give yourself a little bit of time to take a look at that. In the comments below, let me know which one of the 7 things we do as we near retirement is the one that you're going to do today. Until next time, Wisdomites, remember, wisdom is asking the right questions to allow yourself to get the right answers. Keep asking those questions and you will keep getting those answers. Continue blessings.